Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In this lecture, we are going to talk about the tissue fluid and lymphatic system. First of all, I am going to explain about the tissue fluid. Now, you guys have already a little bit idea about the tissue fluid when I explained you guys about the blood capillaries. Then I explained you a little bit about the tissue fluid. Now let me draw the structure of a blood capillary again. I have taught you in detail that blood capillaries, they are made up of just one layer of cells, and sometimes in between that layer of cells there are gaps. So you guys can see that this is one layer of cells, and you guys can also see that there is gap in between these cells. Another thing which I have taught you before as well, that these blood capillaries, they are always present, or they are passing through the middle of the tissues. So again, suppose that this blood capillary is present in the middle of this purple tissue which I am just drawing. Now all of you know that the same kind of cells, when they join together, they make up a tissue. Now one very important thing which we have not discussed before, which I'm going to discuss right now, that I told you that there are gaps in between the tissue cells. If you see that if this is a cell, there's a gap in between this cell, there is a gap in between this cell as well. Now these gaps, there are gaps between tissue cells. Now these gaps, they are called as interstitial spaces. These are called as gaps as well, and these are called as spaces as well. So these spaces, they are called as interstitial spaces. Now one thing I also told you guys before as well, that what happens, that the red blood cells, they are only able to move in a line in the blood capillaries because of the lumen of the blood capillaries is very narrow. So what happens, that these red blood cells, they will move in single line in one queue. Another thing which I explained you before as well, that through these gaps the blood plasma seeps out. And another thing which I explained, that through these gaps the white blood cells squeeze out. So let me label it over here. White blood cells, they squeeze out. So what happens when the blood plasma will seep out and the white blood cells, they will squeeze out, they will become the part of the interstitial spaces. Now I am just showing it with the help of dots in between the cell spaces. So this tissue, you see this blood plasma which has seeped out, now it is present in between the spaces of all the cells. Now this blood plasma has seeped out. Now it is not part of the blood anymore. Now it is the part of the tissue. So we cannot call it blood plasma anymore. Now we start calling it as tissue fluid. Now it is a fluid which is present in between the tissues. So that is why we start calling it tissue fluid. And as this tissue fluid is present in the interstitial spaces, so we can also name it as interstitial fluid. So remember one thing, that this fluid which is present in between the tissues, it is actually because of the leakage of the blood capillaries. Now this has very huge importance. Why? Because when anything will be diffused out or will be transported from the blood into the tissue cells, first it will enter into the tissue fluid and then it will enter into the tissue cells. Same, if something wants to travel back into the blood, like waste wants to go back into the blood, so this waste first it will go into the tissue fluid, and from the tissue fluid it will go into the blood plasma. So you see this tissue fluid, it helps in exchange of materials a lot. Now here question comes in our mind, that if these blood capillaries are leaking, they have gaps in between them, and the blood plasma is seeping out, white blood cells are squeezing out, so eventually the whole blood should just become the part of the tissues. And what should happen, that you see our ankles, they should swell up, because you see they are present at the terminal ends of our body, but it's not happening. So actually what happens, that this tissue fluid, it's eventually returned back into the blood with the help of lymphatic system, which we are going to discuss now in detail. Now for your understanding, I will draw a small diagram of this again, so that you guys can understand what is actually happening in real time. So right now, lymphatic system we will discuss. On this side, I'm going to draw the smaller diagram so that I can show you what is happening in real time and how this blood plasma which seeped out and became the tissue fluid has returned back into the blood. Again, this is a blood capillary. Around the blood capillary, these are tissue cells. Now you guys have a little bit of idea of another type of capillary which are called as lacteals. If you guys remember the digestive system, in the digestive system, in the structure of a villus, we have already talked about this lacteals. Now these lacteals, I will draw it with the help of this purple color. Now this is another vessel which is just like a blood capillary, but this is called as a lacteal. Now in simpler words, this lacteal, it is a lymph capillary. Now the structure of this lymph capillary is also exactly like a normal blood capillary. Now if I draw a lymph capillary, it will also be like this. It is also made up of single layer of cells. So what happens, that from the tissues, this tissue fluid goes back into the lymph capillaries. So what is happening, that the tissue fluid is going back into the lymph capillaries through the gaps. Now not only the tissue fluid is going back, the white blood cells are also going into these lacteals. Now I will draw a complete lymphatic system of a human body, and I will explain you how it is helpful and how it is pouring this back into the blood, this you see tissue fluid. Now, but before going forward, let me explain you one thing. When the blood plasma was in the blood, we called it blood plasma because it was part of the blood and it was in the blood vessels. But when the same thing came into the tissues, we started calling it tissue fluid. Now this tissue fluid has come into the lymph vessels. We cannot call it as tissue fluid, or we cannot call it as blood plasma. Now we call this liquid as lymph. So lymph, it is the blood plasma which also contains the white blood cells. Now it is going back towards the blood as well. Now for your understanding, I am going to draw a small model of a human body. Now, over here, we have our heart. Now, with the help of green color, I will show two veins. Now, these veins, they are coming into the superior vena cava. Now, you guys don't need to know that much detail, but you guys need to know a little bit of this idea. Now, this vein is called as left subclavian vein, and this one is called as a right subclavian vein. Now, what happens that these lacteals or lymph capillaries, they join together all from the both legs, and you see, remember one thing, when these lymph capillaries, they join together, they make lymph vessels. Now, if you guys remember, when we learned about the blood vessels, we talked about that when the blood capillaries join together, they make veins. Over here, when the lymph capillaries, they join together, they make lymph vessels. Now, remember one thing, that the structure of lymph vessels and the structure of veins is exactly similar. Even the function is similar, that even the lymph vessels, they contain semilunar valves in them. So over here, I just draw one lymph vessel, and lymph vessel also contains semilunar valve. So what happens that the lymph vessels from both legs, from the abdomen, I'm just drawing it like this, from the left side of the chest, left side of the shoulder and left side of the arm, left side of the head and left side of the neck, they pour their lymph into the left subclavian vein. Let me mention over here on this side that both legs, abdomen, then left side of chest, left shoulder and left arm, then left side of head and neck. All these areas, they pour their lymph into the left subclavian vein. Now, I will show it with the purple color, that from the right side of the chest, right shoulder and right arm, and right side of the head and right side of the neck, the lymph is poured back into the right subclavian vein. Now let me write on this side that from right side of chest, from right shoulder and arm, and right side of head and neck, the lymph, it is poured into right subclavian vein. Now, one very important thing which we need to discuss, that in certain areas of our body, these lymph vessels, they are passing, and you see they are joined at certain places a lot. Now those are, you see, our groin area. This where I am making these black color dots, our armpits area. So over here, these lymph vessels, when they are joining together, they are all, you see, overlapping each other. At these places, they make the lymph nodes. Now, in the lymph nodes, the white blood cells, they are huge in number. They reproduce and they increase their number in the lymph nodes. Now, so this is how the lymphatic system is helping in returning the blood plasma which seeped out from the blood capillaries back into the blood. So this is how the volume of blood is maintained. And lymph nodes, where the white blood cells are being produced more and more in number, that is helping in providing immunity. Now the tonsils of your body, which are present in your neck area, in your throat area, they are a type of lymph nodes which are present over here. Now question has arisen into your brain that this lymph, why is it going back into the veins? Why not in an artery? The answer is very simple. You guys have learned in physics that two liquids which have the same pressure will mix together, but if there are two liquids which are flowing with different pressure, they do not mix together. So remember one thing I told you over here, that the structure of lymph vessels and the structure of veins is exactly similar. And another thing, that the veins and lymph vessels, they have same pressure. These lymph vessels and these that we mentioned over here, lymph vessels and veins, they have same pressure, which is 5 millimeters of mercury. So as they have the same pressure, so that is why the lymph is poured into the veins, so that the lymph becomes the part of the blood and becomes the blood plasma. So this is all we need to know about the lymphatic system and the tissue fluid. Thank you very much.